Okay, 15 minutes, the GARM framework. Here we go. So what is it? A sustainability framework put together by the World Federation of Advertisers and GARM, which is part of the WFA, and Net Zero. So basically a global group of almost every major stakeholder. Pretty much collaborative. So this is called uncommon collaboration, meaning all the agencies participated. Instead of competing with each other, let's do this together. So we have one standard, one framework, and we don't have different groups doing different things. This is very rare in our industry. Why do we have it? Well, variability in emissions measurement. There's a bunch of different companies that have been doing emissions measurement. Scope 3, my company does it. There's other startups, there's consultancies, the agencies have carbon calculators, and they're all different. That's a problem. Secondly, everybody reaches out to all the media suppliers, to ad networks, to technology companies, to platforms, to media owners, all asking for different things. And so no one does anything. That's inertia. And then third, we have regulatory and reporting requirements. And so we actually need to train the entire industry on this. I talked to a big advertiser last week who said, we have a 46% reduction target for our media organization. We need to learn how to do this. We need our agency to do this. We need our media suppliers to do this. Everybody needs to speak the same language. So this is really important if we want to upskill the entire industry. Okay, so who put this together? Climate scientists. This is the important part of this. It was not just a bunch of ad people. This is also sustainability folks. I think this is a key point. This framework is the first cut. It doesn't have every channel yet. It doesn't have all the details yet. There's still a lot of work. So this took a year to get here. It's going to get better. And I think this is a really important point too. So in sustainability, we talk about either spend-based or activity-based numbers. Spend-based means I spent $1 million, and on average, there's a kilogram of carbon for every $1,000, and so multiply and you get 1 metric ton per $1 million. That's a very high-level way to look at things. The problem is that we know that media has dramatic differences. Even if you say, I bought Google, well, is that Google YouTube, or is that Google search? Probably 10 or 20 times difference in those emissions. So we actually need to know how many impressions, how many views, how many skips did I get on YouTube, because that will tell me how much data I transferred to a consumer. So we need activity-based data, not spend-based data. And we need this on each product we buy, probably broken down, even to the market level, to the size level, to the device level, because YouTube is going to be very different on a mobile device than it is on my TV. Okay, so that's really, really important. We also need a way to sort of look across channels. Because out of home, which is vinyl, maybe lit, maybe not, will be dramatically different than advertising on the web. And so we need to at least talk about those the same way. And then we need to figure out how to audit all of this. Because if we have regulations like CSRD in Europe, we need to actually audit the entire process. And so for a measurement company like Scope 3, we're going to have to stand up and say to a chief sustainability officer or even to the EU, here's why this is actually as accurate as we can make it. And here's how the science ties out. And here's how these pieces come together. So using this framework means instead of having to audit every single vendor, we can audit the framework once it's fully completed. And anybody, whether it's a media person or a sustainability person or a procurement person, can be confident that these numbers will all work. So I think this is a good framework. How would we use this? Well, first off, we have to benchmark. So we need to collect all of our data, put it into a sustainability platform. Again, could be Scope 3, that's our company, could be something else. Then we have to reduce our emissions. And that could be either by changing our spend, maybe buying different products, maybe different channels. Most of it's going to come from pushing our partners, going to our agencies, going to our ad tech companies, going to media owners and saying, hey, what are you doing? Can you please do something about this? And then we're going to optimize in each of our channels. So in programmatic, maybe we're going to stop buying made for advertising, or we're going to focus on not buying non-viewable inventory. And out of home, maybe we're thinking about, how we look at billboards and lighting, or we think about, whether we need to have OLED technology on kiosks, which is a much lower power way to do things. So each channel is going to have different optimizations that we can think about. Okay. And one thing they talk a lot about here is voluntary frameworks. And I think this is because, the WFA can't mandate, in fact, shouldn't mandate what we do. while it is voluntary, I encourage, and I think we all encourage, the industry to align around these standards and to really get to this place. Audited activity-based emissions data. Really, really important because this is the only way to make the numbers accurate and to be confident that when we think we're doing something to make emissions go down, that emissions actually go down. And this pro-competitive point ties to this. Is like, we all need to align on this. It shouldn't be like, my numbers are better than your numbers, Group M or Publicis or whoever. It's just the numbers. Let's just move past that point of competing on the numbers. Let's compete on tools. Let's compete on, how we actually build this into our media operations. So I like that. Okay, so there's some good advice here about quick wins, about benchmarking. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. One thing I do want to show is the incredible quality of companies that were involved in this. Look at these climate scientists. I mean, these are really legit organizations. PwC, BL Evolution, Brain Oxygen, Unilever, Reckitt. Like, these are great companies, and some of the biggest media companies in the world participated. Google's here, Group M, Meta, NBCU. A lot of the, you've heard of Amazon. This is the industry. Like, the industry came together for this. I think that's really important. And it's global. This isn't just, the US. It's also, I can't say this, UDM here in France. It's ISBA in the UK. So this is a global process. So lots of people involved. So these are the different solutions in this framework. So, and you can kind of see how they fit together. So the idea is, and I think this is a good way of looking at it, there's a framework for emissions by channel. So this is, each channel is going to have its sort of high level, what is measured. And then there's some details, some actual calculations. You can see this spreadsheet icon, like what's in the actual formula. And these will need to be very detailed to be auditable. Then there's, how do you get this information? Now some channels, this is going to be very difficult. Like in programmatic with millions of websites and hundreds of ad tech providers, you'd have to get very detailed information. It's going to be different in every country. This is not a spreadsheet. This is a massive data request. In other channels, it may actually be a spreadsheet. Out of home being an example where there probably could be a spreadsheet of every screen and how it was manufactured and where it gets its energy. And then there's these data hacks. So for a measurement company like Scope 3, we probably aren't going to have information on every single thing in the world immediately. How do we get reasonable data behind it? And a good example might be TVs. I don't know on linear what TV every consumer has. Just don't have that data. And I don't know if you have one TV or 5 TVs in your house. So how can I get reasonable information about TV viewership? And now, interestingly, there's a hack version of that, which is you use the average for the country. There's also, measurement companies, attention companies that have panels. And so if there's a panel of 5,000 TVs in the UK, that actually is a pretty interesting way. And those are by channel, by day. Is that a better data source, actually, than just sort of using an average? Could we say this program is actually watched more on big TVs? And by the way, we get co-viewership numbers. We know how many people are actually watching. And so that actually is really powerful data. So we're moving from averages and guessing to pretty good survey. Now, we're not going to have that in every country. Those data sources are expensive. And, this is a good question for some of the trade associations, which is, could we get some of these panel data sets to contribute aggregated data for us so that we all have the same numbers versus having to have every company like ours licensed from different vendors? Because then we end up with this challenge. So accuracy may come with cost and complexity. Is it important and worth it? So these are the conversations we're going to have over the next years. And then data sources. As I mentioned, there's the hack version, which is the average size of a TV in France, versus the actual data sources, which is either coming from a third-party vendor, or as an example, like if this is a Samsung TV, Samsung on their ad network actually know, because they have code running in the TV, they know the exact model, and they have the life cycle analysis from manufacturing the TV, wherever they make it. Actually, for some companies you buy from, they may have very accurate information. If you buy from Roku, they're going to know more about the environment than the average. And so actually, this is another case of particular providers have really great data about how these things work. So this is all part of the process, is how do we gather that data? How do we make sure we know how the pieces fit? One thing you'll note is that this is a 1.0 standard. So you can see that we have channel emissions frameworks for a lot of channels, but cinema's not quite ready. We have detailed formula for some of these channels, and these are very basic right now, but look at all this wave 2. A lot of this stuff still isn't built. And so this is wave 2, I think, is in the fall. I think we'll see version 1.1, version 1.2. There's a lot more work to be done here. Don't let this dissuade you from using these formulas and using this framework. It's way better than what we've had, and we can start building on it, especially the connections to our sustainability teams. Okay? And now I'm going to jump into an example of, one more thing. This is important actually, is data specificity. This is how granular is the data from this framework. So level 0 is we're guessing. Level 1 would be like spend-based data at the entire organization level. So like News Corp is a great example where they have a great global sustainability report, but what does that mean for Australia? Or what does that mean for the UK? It doesn't exactly say. So that would be market level. If they broke that data out by market, still they have a bunch of different properties, and they have a bunch of different parts of their business, print and digital. Well, maybe if we get to business unit, that helps. But the reality is we've really got to get down to media product. I need to know if I'm buying print. I need to know if I'm buying digital. I need to know if Wall Street Journal is fundamentally different than the New York Post, which they are. If you just look at the sites, they're totally different. They have different custom ad products. If I buy a sponsorship on the Wall Street Journal, it's actually running through a totally different tech stack than if I buy a programmatic ad. And so we really have to get down to this level. And so this is what I would encourage everyone to say is this is sort of fine, and maybe it works for offline channels where it's not that different, like buying a TV show in linear, probably running on the same basic TVs regardless of who you buy it from. It's not going to work for digital. So this is really, really important, especially for the digital channels. Okay, so I'm going to go down here and, sorry, I keep thinking I'm going to get to the channels. This is also super important. This is going to be sustainability nerd talk, and I apologize. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, important language to know. Scope 1 is the resources you burn yourself to make energy, or, I guess for solar, it's not burning, or wind. But this is if you have a smelter or if you have a power plant that you operate and you put coal or natural gas or whatever into it. Scope 2 is emissions from electricity you buy. So if I go to the grid right now, I'm in a room on my computer, the French grid is mainly nuclear powered. So that's important to understand. And then Scope 3 is my entire supply chain. It's all my vendors, it's my employees, it's everything outside my direct control. So Scope 3 is the biggest by far. These are important. Location-based means what's the grid right now here in Paris? Market-based means we net out any power purchases or renewables or anything else I've done financially to try to offset my emissions. I strongly believe that market-based emissions are just a form of offsetting, and that there's not a really clear connection between me, buying a credit in, China right now or from last year, that it's changing the grid and it really drives a better grid mix here. People argue with this, but I think we all agree that a location-based is the only real way to connect what we're doing today on this particular ad impression with what's happening on the grid. So I think this is going to be the standard. There's still some stuff that's market-based, and there's still some conversation about how to deal with this. Like what are, if Google has a solar farm next door to a data center, well, that's location-based. That's in the location. What if they have a solar farm that's in the same grid region but not next door? Does that count? Because their solar farm is on the grid. So these are things we have to figure out. Don't worry about that part, but it's important to know. I've got one more minute. Okay, we're going to get to this. Come on, let's go look at a formula. All right, so this is digital. Creation, distribution, consumption. Creation is making the ad. Distribution is actually choosing which ad we serve and then delivering the creative. And then consumption is what happens on your device. So 3 basic sections. And one thing you'll note, if we scroll way down, is that, if we go to out of home, creation, distribution, consumption. Now, in out of home, we have disposal because we have to get rid of the vinyl. So this is the 3 basic categories. These are very similar to what we've seen from SRI. It's what Scope 3 has been doing with our open source framework for a couple of years. No big changes. But if you look at all these steps, and there's a lot of steps, don't have to read these formulas about how long a spot is and summing all the networks and all these pieces, these are the details about exactly how everyone's going to calculate these numbers. So this is the meat of it. That's not the important part. The important part is this exists. The really important point is, we have a framework, and you can now trust that sustainability can become part of your day job, that you can learn how to work with vendors, to work with this data, to optimize on emissions, and to actually make the entire world more sustainable because we have a framework that everyone's using, that everyone's bought into, that is going to align with the GHG protocol, that's going to align with regulation. This is a framework. This is a set of skills you can learn. This is a set of tools you can use. This is a huge step forward for the industry. Okay, 15 minutes and 30 seconds. Pretty close.